Welcome to yet another lecture of the web based decision support systems course. And as promised in the previous lecture, we are now moving towards understanding the concept of database, the major aspects of database, how to create a database, and how to design, create a database, and how to manipulate a database, and also maybe optimize a database kind of a thing. Okay. So, without much delay, let us get into the major thing, database technologies history. And this is important, especially when you are looking at a DSS, because in a corporate DSS this is very important aspect. So, the first one is what we call as the hierarchical and network models. Okay. The first aspect that we need to think in the introduced in mid 1960s, okay, until 70s, mid 70s. Okay. So, this is like mostly COBOL, DBase, etc. Okay. Still a bulk of worldwide database, okay, occurs in this mode. Okay. A majority chunk is still part of this. Second one, relational model. Okay. So, introduced in 1970s, okay, driven by IBM and universities, okay, and the RDBMS, the relational database management system products, software products emerged in early 80s. Okay. So, the relational model, which is the most popular one, this is mostly used by DSS. The corporate DSS uses mostly the relational model. Okay. Then comes the third one is the object oriented model. Okay. You can call it as early 90s, okay, aimed at complex data processing, like example of this is CAD, computer aided design. This is computer aided design, GIS, geographic information system. Okay. So, the object oriented model came in 1990s, and now lot of these specific ones are then coming as part of it and still gaining popularity. And then we also have what we call as web data. Okay. Mostly we can think about as hypertext markup language, HTML, okay, with link to other pages. So, the entire website, interlinked websites is another type of a data. Okay. Then you have something like, also this contains something called e-commerce websites is another example, right, mostly using standards like XML. XML is extended markup language. Okay. That kind of a thing. Okay. So, these are the major technological. So, this is web data is again became popular in, you can think about it as 90s to and growing. Okay. So, like websites like e-commerce, like eBay and stuff like that actually created lot of these aspects related to. And again, remember, this object oriented model of is also becoming popular, because especially CAD GIS systems are gaining popularity as part of this. Now, let us see why you need the characteristics of a database approach. Okay. So, this is another aspect that we need to do. So, the main reason is the database approach. Why do we do database approach? Maintains a single repository of data of data. Okay. So, the main reason is you have a single location where it is, okay, and single repository. Okay. Database approach allows, okay, to define data only once. Okay. So, you do not need to keep on, you define it once for your application and that is it. Okay. And then allow access to various users simultaneously. Okay. So, the major aspect is you maintain a single repository of data rather than every decision maker carrying one individual copy of the data. You have a single repository of the data, in which the entire data, whatever is contained in the repository, is defined only once and uniformly defined, and allow various users, allow access to various users simultaneously. At the same time, people can access a single repository of data. So, that is the main characteristics of a database approach, and these are from DSS standpoint. Okay. So, what is the major difference between, why can't we just use files? Okay. Instead of, why do we need to go with the database approach instead of the file processing approach? Okay. So, the main advantages of it is, okay, the first advantage is self describing. Okay. This is the first advantage. So, that means having complete description of database structure, and constraints. In addition to data. Okay. In addition to just defining the data, you have a complete description of the structure of the entire database and the constraints or the restrictions that are associated with the data. Okay. So, this description, when you say, okay, this description, the complete description is called as, the way name for it is called metadata. So, when somebody says metadata, we are talking about is the complete description of the data. Okay. That is the first advantage of using the database approach over file approach. Number 2, insulation between programs and data. Okay. So, what happens is, what is program? Program in another way is logic. It is a logic written in a computer language, so that the computer can do, and the data is something upon which the program acts upon, right. So, the implication is structure of database is stored in DBMS and not in the application program or program, whatever you want to call it, application program. Okay. So, this term for this is program data independence. Okay. So, it insulates programs and data. Okay. It separates the logic and the data. The third one is insulation between programs and operation, not data, operation. Okay. So, program is again logic and operation. Okay. So, operation is the sequence, the way in which you are operating the program. So, what it does is it allows users to use functions irrespective of its implementation. Okay. So, it does not matter if you say 5 multiplied by 3, okay, whether it is multiplied in this way or it is 5 plus 5 plus 5, whichever way you have implemented it does not matter. Okay. You do not care how the operation is implemented. Okay. So, what is this is known as program operation independence. Okay. Database allows you to do that, independence. Okay. So, what sometimes people are always ask what is operation, okay, and for this practical purpose in this DSS course, okay, we call it as a also known as a function or method, okay, that has both interface and implementation. Okay. So, you are saying that if you write something like function add integer a integer b, if this is a function and what happens is sum is equal to a plus b and you say return sum, if you do something like this. So, what actually happens is this is the interface, okay, this is the interface of the function and this is the implementation of the function. Okay. Both interface and implementation, that is known as a operation. Okay. So, now we get into we continue on why we need to use database approach over the file approach. Okay. And one of the major so we already seen the 3, the fourth one is multiple views of the data. Okay. You have multiple views of the data. So, what does it means is user dependent view that describe only the data which is of interest to that user. Okay. Critical is whatever the user wants, whatever it is of interest or importance to that user, only describe and display that data. So, which implies different user translates to different views. Okay. So, the fourth part is the support multiple views of the data. Then comes the fifth one. Okay. We talk about it as data abstraction. It is a fancy word. So, what it does is, what it implies is hide storage details and only present the conceptual view to the user. Okay. So, what happens here is you do not care in which track, okay, which sector of the hard disk this data is stored, it is hidden from you and you are basically saying that okay, here is. So, if you say temperature is 41.3 degrees Celsius, okay, how this data is stored is immaterial to you. but you just remember that, or you just told that the value of the variable temperature is now at 41.3 degree Celsius. Okay. And you can remember this as it is accomplished using data model. Okay. Then the sixth one, another major one, sharing data and multi-user transaction processing. Okay. So, it allows for the sharing of the data, and it also allows for multi-user to process a transaction, right. So, which implies what? Allows concurrent, okay, which means simultaneously concurrent users to retrieve and update the database. Okay. You can retrieve or ask, query, withdraw information, and you can also update the information that is available in the database. How? Concurrently, not one at a time, simultaneously. Okay. So, one of the keywords you can heard about it as OLTP. Okay. It stands for online transaction processing. Okay. So, what it does is it ensures that each transaction is fully and correctly executed, or either you fully and correctly execute or completely aborted. Okay. Either you completely execute or you do not execute at all. Okay. So, there is two parts to this. One is called atomicity, okay, implies either all database operations, in a transaction are executed or none. Okay. So, atomicity implies all operations in the database operations in a transaction are executed, otherwise none of them are executed. Second is isolation. Okay. So, which means each transaction execute in isolation from one another. Okay. So, when one transaction is done, it isolates itself from the other transaction that is going to happen. So, these are the two aspects that allows for OLTP or online transaction processing. So, database approach is essential to make sure that OLTP is achieved. Okay. So, then we get into what we call as database users. Okay. So, for us there are so many type of database users, but we try to at this point try to discuss only 4 type of database users or end users as part of the database. So, number 1 is the casual user. Okay. So, how do we define a casual user? Occasional access, okay, mostly requiring different information each time. So, these users they do not access every day, they access it occasionally, and each time they access they look for different information. Let us take few examples of this, okay, like an auditor of a company, okay, legal expert, etc., are examples of such casual users. Okay. The second user is what we call as naive or parametric user. Okay. They are users that are constantly querying and updating and updating. Okay. Querying also means retrieving, okay, is another word for this. We will talk about the later. Updating the database using carefully programmed and tested applications. Okay. So, they consistently or constantly query and update the database, and they use carefully programmed and tested applications. Okay. What are these ones known as? Okay. Such apps or applications, there is a name for it. It is called canned transactions. It is like canned beans. Okay. So, everything is in one can kind of a thing. Example of this, okay, is a bank teller, okay, travel agent, etc. Okay. Then comes a third user, which is a sophisticated user, okay, who is thoroughly familiar with the DBMS, with the database management system, okay, who are capable of implementing, they are capable of implementing their applications, their own applications. They can program and implement applications to meet complex requirements. Okay. So, these are people who are capable, they are very familiar with the DBMS, and they can implement, they can code their own application to meet whatever the sophisticated details. Example of this is scientists, engineers, business analyst, etc. Okay. And then comes the last one. Okay. No, it is not the last one. For us, these are the four major things. There are other versions also. Standalone, they maintain, okay, or maintains personal database. They maintain personal database using ready-made graphics based standalone software packages. Software packages. Okay. The examples of this are things like tax consultants, okay, insurance consultants, etc. Okay. So, they have a very specific database that is ready made, okay, for a very specific application, mostly graphics based or GUI driven, and these are standalone software packages. Now, we will get into what you call as when to use a database management system and when not to use a database management system, and then we will start with an example. Okay. So, the coming lecture what we will do is we will quickly spend when to use a database and when not to use a database, and we will start with an example, and then we move into something called an ER diagram and how to use an ER diagram to conceptualize a database, and then we go from there. Thank you very much.